Hello everyone. In the previous lectures, we have learned about the what do you mean by cost of capital, what are the different features of cost of capital, how to calculate the cost of debt, how to calculate the cost of preference shares, and how to calculate the cost of equity. So today in this lecture, we are going to just revise a little bit of what we have done already, and then we are going to start with WACC. The full form of WACC will be weighted average cost of capital. That means in this lecture, we are going to combine all the things, whether we have calculated cost of debt, whether we have calculated cost of preference shares, we have calculated cost of equity. So what we are going to do now, we will combine everything because capital means the formation of each and everything. So capital. So first of all, let's talk about the capital. As I have already discussed that whenever we are forming the capital means a combination of various things. Capital means the money that we have invested in the business. So capital can be formed with the help of your retained earnings. That means whatever is left over in business, your profit, you are investing that in your business, or you are taking the bank loan, or I can say you are borrowing the money with the help of debentures and bonds, or you are borrowing the money with the help of preference shares, or you are borrowing the money with the help of equity shares. So your capital will be either of retained earnings only, or either of your retained earnings plus your bank loan, or it can be a combination of retained earnings, bank loan, debentures also, or it can be the combination of debentures or preference shares, or it can be debentures, bonds, and equity shares, or it can be the combination of each and everything. So, as I have already told you, nothing comes free in this world. So, if I am investing my own money, so it has a cost, which will be considered my opportunity cost. If I am borrowing the money from the bank, I have to pay the interest. If I am borrowing the money from the bonds or debentures, as you already know the features of bonds and debentures, we have to pay the fixed rate of interest, so we have to pay interest. So interest is my cost for borrowing the money from the debentures. If I am borrowing the money from the preference shares, I have to pay the preference dividend. And if I am borrowing the money from the equity shares, I have to pay the dividend to them. So everything comes with the cost. So these are my costs. These are all my costs for borrowing the money from these sources. So the abbreviation for opportunity cost, I'll be using KR, cost of retained earnings. So abbreviation for cost over here will be K and retained earnings is R. For interest, I'll be using KL. So I can say interest is a cost of borrowing money with the help of bank loan. So KL will be considered as a cost of borrowing bank loan, which is interest. Similarly, KD will be the cost of borrowing the money from debentures or bonds. KP will be the cost of preference shares. So I can say preference dividend will be considered as a cost from borrowing the money from preference shares. And KE will be the cost of equity. That means if I am borrowing the money with the help of equity shareholders, I have to pay a certain cost to them. Now, if I am borrowing the money from all these sources, so what I have to do, I will add all these costs, and that will be known as my cost of capital. So I can also name it as overall cost of capital. So I'll be using the abbreviation KO. Or if I'll name it as a weighted average cost of capital, I'll be using the abbreviation WACC. Okay. Now, if I talk about weighted average cost of capital, for calculating the weighted average cost of capital, we have two different parts. One I can calculate with the help of book value weights, and one I can calculate with the help of market value weights. Now, first understand what you mean by book value weights. Book value weights means whenever you are forming a capital structure or it has a different combinations. So whatever cost you have written in your balance sheet, that will be the cost of the amount at which you purchased all these things. So we will calculate the weights according to the historical cost. So I can say the proportion of the company's capital structure based on historical cost as recorded in your balance sheet will be considered as your book value weights. On the other way, market value weights means the proportion of company's capital structure based on the current market price of its securities, reflecting the current market perception of their value. That means now in market value weights, we are going to calculate the proportion of capital structure based on the market value. Suppose you can say you have purchased let's say you are having the combination of debentures and your equity shares. And in your books, let's say you have borrowed, let's say $1,000 from the debt and $1,000 from the equity. That means total capital structure consists of $2,000. So your historical weights will be equal. I can say 50% from debt and 50% from equity. But if we are going to calculate the market value weights, we cannot say the proportion of our capital structure is 50% each. We have to see at what market price it is prevailing in the market. That means at what price my debentures are being selling in the market, or at what price my equity shares are being sold in the market. So on the basis of that, I am going to calculate the proportion of the market value weights. So in this lecture, I'll be just discussing about the format and a basics of your WACC based on the historical cost. In the next lecture, we will be talking about in more detail about the historical cost and your market value weights. So this will be our format for calculating the weighted average cost of capital. Over here, we will be writing the sources of capital from whatever sources you have borrowed the money. I have just written the 3 sources. You can write all those sources. Over here, I am going to write amount invested in each source. Here, after tax cost, that means what is the cost of borrowing the money. So over here, I'll be writing cost of equity, cost of preference shares, and cost of debt. Here, we will be calculating the weights, and then we are going to multiply the cost and weights to calculate the weighted average cost of capital. I have taken a small question. The question says that XYZ Limited is having a cost of debt of to be 15%. That means I have already calculated the cost of debt to be 15% and cost of equity to be 20%. And capital structure consists of only debt and equity, and equity proportion is 6 and debt proportion is 4. So I can say 6:4 is a ratio of debt and equity. So if suppose 1,000 you have borrowed the $1,000, so 600 from equity and 400 from your debt. So over here, since nothing is given, so I have just assumed that I am borrowing $1,000, out of which 600 from equity and 400 from debt. Cost is already given, so we have already calculated the cost. We have already written. So cost is 20%. So instead of 20%, I can write 0.20. And for debentures, it's 0.15. Now we have to calculate the weights. Now how to calculate the historical weights first? Since you have invested $600 from 1,000, that means total capital structure is 1,000, and out of which 600 you have borrowed from equity share capital. So for calculating the weights, it will be 600 divided by 1,000, and similarly 400 divided by 1,000, which comes out to be 0.6 and 0.4. Do remember the total of the weight should be 1. Now next step, we have to just multiply these two. So the total comes to your total weighted average cost of capital will be 0.18, or you can say 18% will be your weighted average cost of capital. That's all for today's lecture. So for the next lecture, we will be discussing about your market value weights and more about the historical weights. So for the reference, you can refer to my book, Financial Management. Thank you.